Welcome to Taiwan Talks, covering the latest global news from a Taiwan perspective. I'm Albert Cho. Recent escalation in Israel-Palestine conflict raises concerns about potential Iranian involvement. How would this impact U.S.-China-Taiwan relations? As Taiwan celebrates its 112th National Day, President Tsai Ing-wen, in her 8th year of leadership, emphasized democratic Taiwan is resilient and sustainable in her address. Let's hear her message.
我再一次强调，和平是两岸唯一的选项，以维持现状作为各方的最大公约数，就是确保和平的关键之要。特别是全球都已经体认到，台海的和平稳定是国际社会安全与繁荣不可或缺的要素，任何一方不能片面改变现状，两岸分歧必须透过和平方式解决。
In her address, President Tsai Ing-wen emphasized Taiwan 36 times and referenced peace 10 times. As President Tsai approaches her last year in office, what approach should Taiwan take amid evolving global circumstances? Joining us for discussion are Raymond Sung, Prospect Foundation Vice President, and Lev Nachman, National Chengchi University College of Social Sciences Assistant Professor. A very warm welcome to both back on the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, the first question goes to Raymond. In light of the current global situation, what key messages, as you see, does President Tsai Ing-wen final day speech convey with 36 mention of Taiwan and 10 reference to peace, summarizing her 7 years of the performance? Yeah.
I think the emphasis on peace will be the focus for the latter part, especially traditionally in the president's speech in this kind of occasion, deal with the so-called cross-strait relationship, the relationship between Taiwan and China. We will discuss it later. But the focus for the former part of her speech really is a wholesome review of her achievement in the last 8 years, especially about the domestic reforms, sometimes very difficult reforms like the legalization of same-sex marriage, pension reform, labor protection, especially answering responsive to social needs, for example, the need of Taiwanese people about housing, social housing, and about the boasting about economic development, very good performance in recent years, and about reducing the dependence on China. Those kind of reforms corresponded to what Tsai promised to Taiwanese people when she took office. She said she will leave a better Taiwan for future generations. And I think Tsai is being very conscious about emphasizing what her legacy has been and what also indicating to what could have been achieved and the difficult task ahead for the future leaders. So she said, my term will end, but our fight for Taiwan will continue. I think the former part emphasis is like a wholesome overlook of her, what she has achieved in her administration.
Yeah, let's talk about implication from her speech later, from your perspective. But now we kind of stick to the text a bit. So Lev, what do you see, from her speech?
I saw a lot of what she's trying to convey that the DPP can continue to offer. So much of what the 2024 election is about is trying to convince voters that the last 7 years under the DPP have been good for Taiwan. Because ultimately what the DPP is trying to sell is, for at least 4 more years of DPP governance. And what Tsai was really trying to focus on in her speech was highlighting exactly where her administration succeeded. It was a lot of needed humble bragging on her part to be able to show, like, look, these are the things that we've done really well and very clear deliverables that I have provided as president, with the hope that it is enough for voters to hear that this is what they would get more of if they continue to have the DPP in power.
Okay, so I think that's a great point because speaking of the Taiwan's global position, right? That were highlighted in relation to President Tsai Ing-wen's leadership compared with 7 years ago. So could you kind of make a comparison between 7 years ago when Ma was in office and now Tsai approaching to the end of her term?
I would see actually Tsai's legacy included that. That's we take the position Taiwan is now for the global public and for the international society compared to about 8 years ago. It's huge different. partly because the heighten of the tension of the cross-strait situation and the immediate and imminent military threats from China, and also about the key importance, especially after the COVID, and the excellent performance about public health and the vulnerability in supply chain, and to highlight the importance of the semiconductor center, how Taiwan is such a production center. And those factors really highlighted how important Taiwan is. So that's why Tsai quoted the G7 statement saying that the peace and security over Taiwan's Strait has been an indispensable element for the whole international community that really encapsulate the importance and how Taiwan came from the code compared to 7 years ago.
So what about you, Lev, regarding the change in the international status when Taiwan can work and influence something?
Right. Well, so, the elephant in the room is that before the DPP was in power and the KMT was in power, cross-strait relations were much more open. And as soon as the DPP comes into power, the PRC cuts off access from having meaningful dialogue along the two sides of the strait. So that's makes the two very, very different just from there. Okay. But domestically, of course, it's when Ma Ying-jeou was at the end of his term, his popularity was relatively low. It was at the following the Sunflower Movement, which was a big blow to the KMT and their economic goals. Versus Tsai is on her way out, but she doesn't have quite the same low level of popularity. She's in a better position, and in the polls, the DPP candidate is polling better than the KMT candidate was 7 years ago during this time. So that doesn't mean any sort of sure thing for the DPP by any means, but I think just based off of popularity and public opinion, I think Tsai is in a slightly higher place than maybe Ma Ying-jeou was 7 years ago.
Okay, many people were also concerned with Tsai's updated attitude towards CCP. She actually extended the Beijing term for mutually acceptable interaction and emphasized peace. She said peace several times as the sole option for cross-strait relations. Some scholars view Tsai's ability to assert herself against the mainland while advocating for peace as a display of confidence. So how do you perceive this?
Right. I think the element of peace is really important. Also, it's very, very the center of the focus for the 2024 election, when the CCP and the opposition parties' camps emphasize that, try to persuade Taiwanese public that if you vote for DPP, that it will bring war rather than peace. So that's why Tsai puts such an emphasis on the element of peace. But her formula is interesting. Actually, there are 5 elements in her speech.
What are those?
Firstly, that it has to be based in Taiwanese people's wishes, and it has to be on the condition of equality and dignity on both sides. And the both sides need to engage in inclusive dialogue or democratic dialogue. And it will have to be finding mutually acceptable formula. That is the different from the previous speeches, because previously she said, we will conduct the cross-strait relations in accordance with our constitution, which is our ROC constitution, and the cross-strait legislation. But nowadays, those kind of pretexts or preconditions, even that has been dropped just for the mutually acceptable formula to continue and to achieve the peaceful coexistence. Those 5 elements, I would say, are new. New to any precedent speeches about the cross-strait relations. So we can delve deeper into those kind of elements.
Okay, one intriguing question, maybe from the domestic politicians in Taiwan, is that whenever KMT or say TPP say peace, regarding China, then they could be viewed as submissive to the CCP. But why not CCP doing the same thing, but still view
that?
Yeah.
The key element is peace on the status quo. On the status quo, meaning the peaceful status quo and democratic Taiwan, which is the essence of the status quo. So she's not given in any of those sovereignty, but on the condition of maintaining the peaceful status quo, we can engage into that dialogue.
Okay, great. What about you, Lev?
Yeah, I think obviously there's new elements, but I would like to highlight the not new elements, which is what was just brought up, which was Tsai's, again, adamant appeal that she falls under the belief that the status quo is the way forward for peace and security in the cross-strait. This is not new. Both Tsai Ing-wen and the DPP have been advocating for the status quo for quite some time, as does the KMT. Every political party in Taiwan now is pro-status quo. I think it's just a matter of trying to convince the PRC that what people in Taiwan want is peace and dialogue and the status quo. They don't want a change. The challenge is going to be trying to convince the PRC that, even if we were trying to make it clear using whatever terms that were used in the speech to make it, seem like we're much more willing to engage in peace and security and dialogue, that they believe us.
Well, actually, some mainland Chinese scholars will contend that sidestepping the one China principle make it all futile. I mean, regardless how many times peace President Tsai mentioned, how many times stability or status quo she mentioned, it doesn't matter whatsoever to CCP if there's no one China element. As I observed, I even did not find the term 92 consensus in her speech.
No.
So what's your take on this?
Actually, if you are portraying Tsai as a dangerous figure and which is an irresponsible actor which could badly manage the cross-strait relations, that you are in the air of the extreme minority of the international community. So I would say that that's the stigma attached to Tsai Ing-wen from the CCP or associated scholars from day one of her administration until now. The reasons for that is that they try to continue this line until Xi Jinping says something else, and to want to continue that, to apply it to the future possible DPP administration, which is under William Lai in the current light. So they want to continue that, which makes no sense because it's not in an international consensus anymore. That the both sides relationship needs to start from a certain kind of precondition, which is the acceptance of one China and only one China, no room for respective statements, and one China in principle in accordance to CCP's definition, which is outdated and which is not peaceful, which is given rise to so many stagnation of the dialogue of the two sides. So really, the ball, I will argue, is on the court of the China's side, because if we Taiwanese people elect William Lai next year, and after 8 years of Tsai Ing-wen's administration, and after China has using up all kinds of intimidation, coercion, military threats toward Taiwan and couldn't draw Taiwanese minds closer to it, what else could it do? It needs to find some alternative route, especially dealing with the DPP administration.
Okay, let me follow up. Just give me a brief answer to that. Raymond, don't you think that seeking a consensus with CCP isn't a primary job for Taiwan to do, or you think that it doesn't matter whether there's a consensus over there?
According to Tsai and William Lai, the formula for Taiwan, or the need for Taiwan, is very simple. Taiwanese want to be friends with the Chinese people. We have been a help to the Chinese regionalization and economic development. We want to peaceful coexistence. We don't want anything else. We want to be peaceful. We want to be on good terms. And why could we do that? That's the question.
Okay, one China, Lev.
It's such a trap for anyone in Taiwan, whether you're from the DPP or the KMT, to talk about the 92 consensus or to talk about any sort of one China principle, because even when the KMT talks about the 92 consensus, we don't actually know that that's the same 92 consensus that the PRC is talking about.
Right.
And we don't even know that that's what the public understands to mean 92 consensus. There's actually some really good political science research that shows that a lot of Taiwanese public don't even have a clear agreement on what exactly is this consensus that we all talk about as being sort of a given, understood thing. Obviously, Tsai still has in the past always made reference to respecting 92, but not acknowledge, or some, very careful political language. And its absence here, I think, on one hand, she's not running for office anymore. I don't think she has to necessarily give lip service to every single thing that she normally would in the past. But we also know that 92 consensus for a lot of median voters isn't necessarily the most attractive thing. Obviously, for DPP voters, it's not meaningful. But when it comes to median to maybe light blue voters, that's really where you have to think about, how much do we talk about this thing? and how much do we acknowledge it? And I found her choice not to even mention it to be very interesting, because even in the past she would at least
kind of mention, slightly.
Obviously never to a way that the KMT would endorse, but I did find the absence a very interesting and different move.
We've been free from that.
All right. Now let's move forward. We have President Tsai Ing-wen's concluding address of her term. In her speech, Tsai elaborated on long-standing aspiration shared by President from various political backgrounds. The construction of the submarine over the past 3 decades. Now let's hear an excerpt from President Tsai's speech.
有另一条艰辛的路，我们走了30年。就在上个月底，潜舰国造的第1艘原型舰下水了。在完成后续的测试之后，这艘海鲲军舰预计在2025年正式服役。潜舰国造是历经30年，不同政党的总统都想实现的梦想。现在我们做到了。
NOAA or Haikun class submarine stands as a notable accomplishment for Tsai administration. This highlighting, highlighting of the military capability was tempered by her gesture of goodwill to Beijing, underscoring that peace is the key to survival. Will this strategy have a positive influence on cross-strait relations? This one goes to Lev.
Yeah, I think there's been so much that Tsai has spent on trying to bolster domestic defense. And obviously the submarine is a good cherry to have kind of on top of the cake after her 2 administrations. But obviously any sort of sign that we are bolstering our defenses is always taken in the worst possible light from the PRC's perspective. And that's really the trap that Taiwan is in, is it needs to bolster its defense and domestic capabilities and civilian response and military capabilities in a defensive nature, but any amount of bolstering only gets read by the PRC as aggression. And I think this is sort of similar to, say, the changing from conscription to 1 year, something that I think, on paper seems obvious, but, is also potentially read by the PRC as, oh, well, they're trying to, increase their intention of war and all these other sorts of things that I think are really just more about Taiwan trying to be domestically prepared than anything.
Raymond, so would you kind of please explain a little bit the significance of the Haikun class submarine? People say that it has the capability of deter PLA war fleets from crossing the first island chain. What's your take on this?
We hope that. That's I think the development of Taiwanese made submarine is really necessary for our island defense, especially to defense the underwater situations attacked to our main harbors, because our main harbors will be, in any kind of Taiwan contingency, will be the key for the supply to come into Taiwan. Taiwan's an island, there's no escape of that. So for that, we need submarines. But our current serving submarine has more than 50 years old. And really for the very, very previous generations, we need to find a breakthrough. And to find a breakthrough, as Tsai has said, we tried for 30 years. It's difficult to get key technologies, key supplies, or the key materials needed. So that's all those kind of difficulties that has to be overcome. And Tsai did that. And as the chairman of the task force for submarine said, the biggest player behind the support is Tsai Ing-wen herself. So that's really signified how Tsai is important in delivering that. We hope that Haikun is just the first. That will be second and the third one to really give the Taiwans a safer weapons to defend ourselves against blockade or the encirclement attempt from the PLA.
Lev, so why is the domestically manufactured weapons so important for Taiwan, for its survival, given the fact that still a lot of ban on imports of those materials like what Raymond just mentioned to Taiwan? So what's your observation of this?
It's one of Taiwan's biggest challenges is that the military supplier for all of Taiwan's defensive capabilities is the United States. Having one trading partner for your military supplies is very frustrating. And Taiwan's ability to be able to make its own equipment is fundamental. Not only is it fundamental, but for many in Washington that often say, well, what is Taiwan doing? America supplies all this technology and defense capabilities to Taiwan. What is Taiwan doing itself? And I think this is such an important symbolic victory for the Tsai administration to be able to show, like, we are building our own capabilities. We are investing in our own capabilities. Here is proof. Now, this is only the start. And I think it's important to keep in mind that, one submarine does not win a war. And I think, it's expectations should be tempered, but this is a very important first step in that process.
Okay, I mean, all of this Taiwan's military capabilities is aimed at against the CCP, but President Tsai Ing-wen also signaled her willingness for democratic dialogue. Before the show, we talked about the translation might be somewhat different in English. Raymond, so would you kind of comment on this? So what does she mean by this democratic dialogue in her speech?
I think that it's only a kind of dialogue or meaningful negotiation. That's my interpretation. There's makes no sense of 民主对话到 democratic dialogue. I will translate this as inclusive dialogue, which means that you hear from all kinds of stakeholders, which is olive branch, express of goodwill, saying that we want to sit upon the table across China. We can talk. We can talk in a meaningful way, meaning that there's no precondition. You don't ask us to give us our own sovereignty. You hear us, and we hear you, that we mutually find acceptable solutions and formula forward. That's really an expression of goodwill. And dialogue, of course, was used by the opposition camp, saying that under Tsai's administration, that CCP cut off all kinds of channels of dialogue, but the KMT has its own dialogue. But the KMT's channel of dialogue is not a state-to-state basis. It's on a party-to-party basis. And it's about plotting to get one China achievable in Taiwan, which is fundamentally different from what DPP is describing, and about the mutually respectable and mutually equal dialogue between two entities or two partners across the table.
Right. So, Lev, what about you? So, isn't the democratic dialogue based on President Tsai Ing-wen's, presumably her wish to kind of seek democracy develop in China, or any kind of implication from that?
Yeah, I wouldn't go so far as to project that Tsai is looking for regime change in the PRC. I think that's maybe perhaps an overstatement. I agree. I think this is much more about meaningful dialogue than necessarily using the de-democracy word. It's very frustrating because I think whether or not you like Tsai Ing-wen over the last 7 years, I think she's shown to have not pushed any sort of major red line. She's been far more pragmatic than I think many might have expected someone from a DPP president, especially in Washington, D.C. That after 7 years, I think it's frustrating that the PRC didn't pick up the phone, because I think there might have been opportunity to have meaningful dialogue with a very pragmatic DPP president. And the hope is that whoever the next president is, that there can be some sort of meaningful, peaceful dialogue, but hopefully under the conditions that Taiwan is seen as a meaningful participant in that talk, not just someone being talked to by the PRC.
Okay, finally, they still kind of bring in the new elements, the Hamas attack in Israel. That's just updated and has an influence, if only remote, on Taiwan. So Raymond, could you kind of comment on the new international status or international situation that might have any indirect impact on Taiwan? What's your take on this?
I think that's, of course, what happened in Israel, the Hamas attack, is a major international security incident in the world, and the implication will be huge. I think every army across the world will be closely watching what is happening on the ground and learning from it. I think maybe it's too premature to comment on that, but there are two main lessons, especially for Taiwan. One is that we need to really review the military intelligence failure, especially on part of the Israeli army, which boasted to be most advanced in this part. For example, also we see the involvement of electronic warfare, the destroying of all kinds of surveillance equipment on the border, and how could that be happened? How that the Israeli IDF military intelligence couldn't detect firsthand, and for all that, Taiwan need to strengthen tremendously on this. We are being very poor on the military intelligence. That's the first thing. Second, we need to watch closely about the possibility of massive, large-scale infiltration of fighters into our own society. That happens to Israel, which is tightly secured, guarded society. That could happen to Taiwan as well.
Mm-hmm. We know that the United States now has assigned a Marine strike group to Eastern Mediterranean Sea. Do you think that's going to distract U.S. attention from the Taiwan Strait and even the Ukrainian
I think for the short term that U.S. will divert some of its military, especially its fleet, to the Middle East, especially to the Gulf or to the areas around Israel. But for the Indo-Pacific preparedness, I don't think there will be a major diversion, because I think the two theaters are totally different. I think the Israeli Gaza or the Hamas situation is on the ground, and the Israeli has strong military capabilities already. But the Indo-Pacific is mainly about aerial and naval theaters, and I think the preparedness of that in the allies will not be lessened or be more loosened.
I do think there is some concern that people see what is happening in Israel-Palestine and think that maybe this will be a context for China to make an action in the Indo-Pacific, and I would very caution against that logic. I think if there's one thing that we've seen from Ukraine is that just because a war is happening somewhere else in the world doesn't mean that China is going to use it as a context. I think we've seen Xi be very rather quiet in his response now, and I think that's a sign that he's not trying to make any sort of rash moves at this moment.
Okay.